Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining this culminating event of the 2015 IDEPEL online conference. We're so excited to be participating in this live fireside chat with Dr. Patrick Jenlink from 10 until 11:30 a.m. today. As you all know, Dr. Jenlink is the Distinguished Professor of Educational Leadership at the Stephen F. Austin State University. He also, of course, is a recipient of the 2015 Raymond A. Horn Scholar-Practitioner Award. Dr. Horn actually has introduced Stephen in the presentation of the award on our day one. So if you haven't had a chance, please definitely review Dr. Horn's introduction because they are good friends, I believe, for a long time. Is that right, Pat?
18, almost 18 years, yes.
So you could tell us all the dirty things about whatever you want about Dr. Horn, too.
I'll probably say that.
Yeah, so I am Aubrey Wang. I am the director of IDEPEL, the Interdisciplinary Doctor Program of Education for Educational Leaders at St. Joseph's University. And joining me today in this live fireside chat with Dr. Patrick Jenlink includes Gifty Key, Jill Schreiber, Sean Murray, and Dr. Stephen Baker. So I will begin then by asking everyone to introduce themselves. Gifty, would you mind beginning?
Sure.
Hello, Khadija.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gifty Key. I'm a fourth-year doctoral student and will be graduating in May. I'm not in K through 12. I'm actually coming from a government-based organization where I taught and instructed on public health issues. I have now focused my concentration of learning in higher education.
That's great. Jill, would you mind going next?
Yes, hi. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jill Schreiber, and I'm a fourth-year doctoral student. I am going to be graduating as well this May, and I am currently a fifth-grade teacher at Skipback Elementary.
Yes. We were very excited to see both Jill and Gifty finishing their dissertation this year. They both did a wonderful job. And, of course, Khadija.
Hi, my name is Khadija Bright. I'm currently a principal resident at Warren Harding Middle School. I, too, will be graduating in May. I defended my dissertation last October.
It's excellent. Do you mind sharing your topic a bit, the title?
My topic dealt with the reconciliation of the between academic identity and ethnic identity for African American students, and looking how high-performing charter schools were able to negotiate or actually reconcile those two identities so that African American students can learn.
Yeah, thank you. Pat, any short messages you want to share?
It's a pleasure to meet everybody and to hear your background and know where you are in the doctoral program and what's up and coming in terms of graduation, as well as what's out in front of some of you for the dissertation process in the future.
Yes, thank you. And Sean?
Your muting is off. Your sound is off, Sean. I believe you have to.
Yep.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I always wanted to say that. I'm a first-year student in the IDEPEL program, so I'm just a little itty-bitty baby, and I have no idea what my dissertation will look like. I am very interested in principal training, and I think I have a question about that for Dr. Jenlink.
Thank you. Dr. Baker?
I am Stephen Baker. I'm an Augustinian, and I'm working at Villanova University. I'm assistant professor in the education department. I am also a graduate of the IDEPEL program, cohort 5.
Okay, great. So we have a first-year student, we have fourth-year students about to graduate, and also other years, but just students about to graduate, finish their dissertations, and also alumnus joining us. So that's wonderful. So we created this live fireside chat so you can all have a chance to really engage in a deeper level conversation with Dr. Jenlink. I guess just to make it so it'll be easier for us, can we all use first names here? Would that be all right? Yeah? Okay, so whoever wants to start, please just start asking away.
All right, I will start.
Very good.
Great.
Hi. I have a question about your cultivating democratic learning communities. And as I'm graduating and looking into the administration of K through 12, if there's any suggestions on how you implement that into your building as a principal.
As a building principal, well, good question. The cultivation of a democratic learning community focuses, I think, first and foremost on understanding the existing culture in the school. As a principal, it really is about, as Freire would say, reading the world before you try to read the word. And I think Freire was focusing on our need to be in relationship with the world around us. And in the case of a democratic learning community, we have to be in relationship with the culture within which we want to cultivate that democratic learning community. Oftentimes, I have witnessed that principals come into a school don't have the necessary understanding of the existing culture that they've inherited from their predecessor, and they set about trying to make changes without understanding what the cultural patterns are. And those patterns are emblematic of a life history that the teachers and students and parents and those that are vested in the school have acquired over time. And so it's somewhat like, what's the architecture? In this sense, the human architecture, the cultural architecture that has to be understood before you try to modify, change, or otherwise transform it into a democratic learning community.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Jen, we're doing first names. I have a question. This year was my first year as a principal resident in a school where the culture is not necessarily focused on learning, it's more behavior. And I went through a principal preparation program where the culture is all about instruction. So you stated earlier that we have to be in relationship with the culture prior to making any changes. I've been struggling because I had a unique vision on where I wanted the school to go, but then teachers have a different mindset. So would you be able to speak into what can I do as a school leader in order to onboard them into and move away from behavior and focus more on instruction?
I will try. I think when I spoke about the principal, you as principal have to have a relationship with the world. In this case, the world will be the teachers, those that populate the culture in the school. Mm-hmm. When we come in, as I noted previously, we have inherited a school culture that our predecessor left for us, whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent. We don't know the quality of that culture until we begin to learn it. We have to spend some time to become familiar with it. We have to be familiar with the infrastructure of the culture. That's part of the cultural architecture. And it's organic. So our teachers have their own belief systems, their own values. And I think for me, the really critical aspect here is, how do I get buy-in by my teachers? But I also have to have buy-in by the parents and others, because there are multiple stakeholders involved in changing a school, transforming a culture. People are familiar with, have become accustomed to, and oftentimes have an illusion of what that culture is. And so that's the way that they see it, understand it, and speak to it. When you talk to them, what they hear are words that work against what they have in their mind about what that culture is. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I found helpful for me as a building principal and later as a superintendent was to cultivate what we typically call town hall meetings, not in the sense of having several hundred people, but we did many town hall meetings where we had maybe a dozen or so people come in, and we did it in intervals across a number of weeks in order to get a sense of what the teachers first, then the parents and other community members had on their mind about what that culture was in the school, what they believed was working and what wasn't working. And then over time, by having that investment in the community and in the teachers, we drew them into what we call critical conversations about how to change, transform the school culture, realizing that in many instances, a school culture does not become what it is overnight. It has several generations of students, and with that, several generations of parents of those students that have gone through that school, have been involved with the school. And so we have to realize that we have to allow time to change. Sometimes a full generation of student. So we think about when they enter kindergarten, when they graduate out of high school as a full generation. It may take a lengthy period of time to cultivate permanent transformation. But we also have to realize, because it's organic, the culture, as it changes, has to continue a change process. So we don't want to have an end point for what we want the culture to be. We have to recognize that the culture will need to continue to evolve over time. And it may evolve beyond our tenure there as principal. So we want to leave it healthy, and we want to leave it viable and accessible for the person that inherits that school from you or from me.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick, one of the things that I'm dealing with in my classes is we are certainly in an age of standards and accountability with No Child Left Behind, with Common Core now, and I guess my struggle is, how do we implement a scholar-practitioner philosophy of teaching and of leadership in an atmosphere of high-stakes standardized testing?
Well, you've asked the most difficult question. One of my former doctoral students is finishing a book right now talking about standardization as a great disease, a virus that has afflicted our educational system in this country. It has undermined the intellectual excellence that we have historically associated with being a democratic society. It is oftentimes, standardization is oftentimes affiliated with neoliberal agendas, which is to de-democratize education. And in many instances, it's about the commodification of the student and the teacher, and looking at how we can transform the system into a capitalist economy. We all know that. So standardization in the background is continuing to work 24/7. It doesn't stop. We look inside of the school today, and what we see, instead of a pedagogy of learning in classrooms, is a pedagogy of accountability. We are spending an inordinate amount of time, our teachers and our principals, focused on guiding the teachers towards test preparation. And so we detract away from the fundamental purpose of the school, which is to educate, and in that fundamental purpose of educating the student is to design, to cultivate, to implement, to facilitate student learning. And what we don't do is realize that every time we add another 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes onto test preparation, we take that time away from the student's ability to learn. And so I think, for me, the fundamental basis of scholar-practitioner leadership, in part, is that we overcome a dualism between the philosophy and the practice that oftentimes separates the school from the university, the academics from practitioners. But it also, a fundamental purpose is our moral agenda, our moral responsibility. I think that in preparing scholar-practitioner leaders, that they have to recognize, they have to bring a critical voice and a critical conversation to the school but they have to do it in a way to where they are inside the school, inside the system, so to speak, because otherwise they can't work against the standardization and the neoliberal agenda that's associated with it. And I think fundamentally, what we lose sight of oftentimes is that it takes a moral courage for us as a scholar practitioner, and we have to instill that in our teachers as well, and in our students that are becoming teachers, and in our individuals that are becoming principals. We have to have a moral courage that says we have to give voice to this problem and to the effect that standardization and testing and Common Core state standards, all of this is having a deleterious effect on our educational system. We have to give voice to that. But we have to recognize in doing so, bringing that critical voice to play, that we've got to keep our place within the educational system in order to give voice to that. So I don't know that there is an easy answer to your question, but I think what there is a realization that, and I'll use Peter McLaren's term, we have to militate against. We have to become militants against the neoliberal agenda. We have to inculcate that in our students. We have to recognize that we have to equip them. And I follow Gandhi very much on this. We do not need a type of resistance that hurts people. What we need to do is work against the ideology. We have to recognize that the people behind the ideology are the architects of neoliberal agendas in our country, and we have to help them to recognize that that's where this agenda is coming from. And so we have to have this kind of passive activity against, this passive action against this standardization and neoliberal agenda. And if we can instill in our students that are going into the teaching and into the leadership professions an understanding of how that neoliberal agenda, how standardization works against the democratization of education, and how it has de-democratized and continues to do so, then we can activate their voice. They can become part of the solidarity against this whole notion of standardization.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to follow up on that. I have a question about training for principals, and I think Khadija offered a really good context. You have a school where, the teachers have a certain mindset or tend to have a certain mindset, and you want a school where the culture and the consciousness is built on learning and not testing or something other than learning, which I would agree with. And I guess my question is, how do you train leaders with hard skills, soft skills, to be able to do that? And then I guess a secondary question would be, what is the role of, for example, IDEPEL? What should I be expecting to learn through what is the role of the university in preparing me to do that?
Another very good question with a not easy answer. I want to reflect on a couple of words. You used the term consciousness. And of course, I'm a student of Freire just as much as I'm a student of John Dewey and others. But I'm a criticalist at heart. And so I recognize that a critical consciousness is a part of the self of the scholar-practitioner leader. And so when I hear that term, to cultivate a consciousness, we have to first begin within ourself. So we have to cultivate the ethical self. And the ethical self recognizes that when there are political agendas, when there are ideologies like neoliberalism, standardization, and so on, at work every day in our education system, we have to recognize consciously what our role, what our duty to self is. And I think in that process, we have to also help to cultivate this understanding of the ethical self in our teachers and in our followers in there. Training, preparing principals to go into this is not easy, because the first thing is, in most instances, our education system at higher ed level does not typically focus on developing the ethical self. It doesn't focus on developing a critical consciousness. So our Western philosophy oftentimes is lost in the process of preparing our educators. It's lost in the sense of it doesn't focus on this kind of critical consciousness that Freire and others have voiced a need for. And so I think that IDEPEL and our scholar-practitioner program here, both the principal prep and the doctoral program, and our superintendency certification, we tend to focus on how do we ask the hard questions? How do we give critical voice to the social issues that we see in the moment when we're in our programs or when we're in our places of work and practice? We have to identify and we have to be able to engage in these kind of hard conversations. And I think that one of the things that programs that are preparing principals and leaders as scholar practitioners have to focus on is while we're guided and while we're required to meet standards and requirements for certification, we also have the opportunity and I think the moral responsibility as faculty to work with our students in principal prep and teacher prep and superintendency prep to really look at these issues that they're going to be dealing with on a day-to-day basis and recognize that these are not going to be easy issues to resolve. If they can be resolved, they will require what I call a critical consciousness, but it will be a public critical consciousness. It will require all of the people involved in the education of children and the education of our students in our higher ed setting and our education of our in-service educators, our teachers. All of this is a larger system than what we tend to understand. But I think you have to really cultivate in the preparation program how to ask hard questions in the politically correct way that gets voice given to the question and it gets an answer to the question that you ask. And not everybody's comfortable. Again, I'll go back to we have to have the moral courage to ask the hard questions. Not everybody's comfortable in that, but we have to be able to do it.
So my question is, how do you ask those questions without creating a sense of polarization in your school? Like in my school, the demographics are mostly African American, Latino, in part, Caucasian, and then most of the teachers who stand in front of children are Caucasian. So how do I as a school leader engage those conversations with teachers in terms of having them develop their ethical self, bringing their perceptions to the table? Like, how do they feel about the demographics that they're teaching to foster that type of culture where we're talking about the hard issues?
Y'all just full of really hard questions. It's interesting. Right now we're doing our on-campus interviews for our next doctoral cohort, and one of the questions we ask in the interview process is how do you cultivate a culture within a school that is sensitive, respectful, and works to deal with the differences in the demographic profile of our changing society. And so when you ask that question, I automatically go back to how our candidates that are applying for the program respond. And some of them oftentimes are not self-aware that they are not self-aware, if you understand the question or the point. I think that what you have to do is and what I did as a building administrator, what I did as a superintendent, I think that you have to schedule time where you can sit down with your teachers. You can do it building by building, small groups at a time, however you want to do it. But you have to schedule time with groups of teachers that you sit in a room and you put those questions out there. And the way I say it is we're going to dance with these questions until we're tired of dancing, but we're going to come to some resolution on this. And we're going to give a critical voice to it. And we practice what I call the art of listening. And I call deep listening, which is a Quaker tradition that I acquired when I was in Michigan, working with groups of teachers in public schools in Michigan. And the deep listening is that you can ask questions of clarification, but you cannot ask questions or make comments that are either critical or condemning or sarcastic or any of those things, nor can you ask questions that aren't points of clarification for the person speaking. And so that when you engage these teachers, you do it with a sense of, we're going to engage in deep listening, we're going to ask hard questions, and we're going to listen to everybody's voice with respect, and we're going to honor those voices, and we're going to understand that before we can engage in a dialogue, we have to first engage in a discussion. We have to understand that a discussion is about beating each other up with words, but we have to get that out of the way. And then we begin the deep listening, and we begin the engagement, and eventually you evolve to dialogue. And the dialogue is about sharing our words in a respectful manner with each other. And I don't think that we spend enough time with our faculty in schools, or with our cafeteria folks, or with our custodians, or our bus drivers, to cultivate the type of culture that we want. But we also don't recognize that just talking with teachers and not engaging the other employees that are in your school in similar kinds of conversations is about valuing the culture and building the culture and transforming it. When we only focus on the teachers and we leave the other employees out, the culture doesn't itself only recognize teachers, it recognizes everybody. Everybody has a voice. And so I think that we have to be mindful of that.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Pat. Now, there's a question from a conference participant. Her name is Rena Kilpatrick Ray, a first-year student. This is her question. Dr. Jenlink's point about culture change taking time resonates with me. I wonder how high teacher turnover in organizations like Teach for America, where teachers are only obligated for 2-year service, affect the ability of a school to create a solid sense of community.
That's a great question. Let me make a political statement first. Teach for America oftentimes is associated with a neoliberal agenda. It's about how we can place teachers in schools with an understanding that they're not going to stay. I'm going to set that out there, and then I'm going to step back from it. I think that what we fail to understand in terms of the school culture in response to this question is that, number one, first point, is that the school culture is organic, it's alive. It is not a rhetorical term that we use, nor should we use it that way. We should recognize that it's organic and it's alive. It is who we are in relationship to each other, our values and beliefs and interaction. And so one of the things that I think that we have to do in this sense is understand over time, to change a culture, to transform it, is to change or transform the people that are the culture within this sense of values and belief systems that they bring to play. Their social patterns, the artifacts in a culture. So artifacts include everything from the discourse artifact, which is the school policy and procedures, to the rules on the school bus, to what goes on in classrooms. It's also, the artifacts are the aesthetic quality, the symmetry or asymmetrical nature at times, oftentimes more so than not, of power relationships. Foucault would talk about the differential in power relationships oftentimes creates an imbalance, a lack of symmetry in the culture of a school or a culture of an organization. But I think what we tend to fail to recognize, to go to the heart of that question, I believe, is that as something that's organic, a culture is created over time. And if we have this constant turnover among teachers or other personnel, culture is reliant upon patterns. If those patterns are disrupted frequently, then we also fragment or rupture the organic infrastructure of the culture by beginning to continually shift the values and belief systems, and so that we lose in large part of what would be called the organizational memory of the school culture, what holds us together. And I think that when we have organizations like Teach for America, where we have teachers 2 years into and then they're out and do something else, that has a negative effect in large part on the culture of a school. Now, if it's one person over time, that's one thing. When it's multiple people in urban population centers, that's quite something else. And we have to recognize that in our urban schools, we have high turnover. Oftentimes, we place teachers in urban and suburban population centers and rural schools as well. But in urban and suburban population centers, we hire teachers to come in who stay 1 or 2 years because they need to get that first or second year experience so they can go to another school where they're more comfortable. So it's also a part of our hiring practices and recognizing that the people we bring in may not stay for reasons that the culture is not a good fit. So I don't know if that gets, for me, it's about how do we have this fluidity in the cultural patterns that builds over time and flows with the values and beliefs of the people that make up the culture. And when we start fragmenting that fluidity and those values and beliefs by bringing people in and out, it's the differential between consistency and inconsistency in personnel. Students feel comfortable when they have teachers over a period of time. They feel less comfortable when they don't.
Yeah, a number of you are nodding your heads. Do you want to add to this?
I actually have a question, Patrick. So, of course, it comes to mind, it brings to mind the cheating scandal in Atlanta with the teachers. And so that makes me question what implications do, I guess, accountability and standards have on the ethical compass and of school culture?
Oh, wow. You just opened up a whole can of new worms. I'm working on a project right now which is about ethical drift in educational research and in educational settings. And so when you reference the cheating scandal in Atlanta, we've had similar episodes in the Houston area. We've had similar episodes across the country in terms of what I call ethical drift in the testing, standardized testing regime that has been required for everybody. And I think that what we have in terms of standards and accountability is imposed by an external force, right, a tension upon the teachers within the system that if they don't meet the expectations set by legislators and by Pearson and by others who are behind this neoliberal agenda on standardization, that we create an inordinate amount of tension for teachers that they can't deal with over time. And as that happens, they look at alternatives, and sometimes it's ethical drift. They slip across the ethical boundary, and they engage in unethical behavior. Right? It's not right, but at the same time, we have to recognize that if we throw the blame on the teachers without recognizing the tension that the standardization and the accountability has created for the educational system, then we're making a victim of the teacher at the same time that we're trying to villainize the teacher by having been unethical. And I think that we have to step back, we being educators, we being scholar practitioners, we being the individuals that have to be the monitor of how this standards and accountability system is systematically making a victim out of everybody and leaving them fewer and fewer options to function. And I know in the state of Texas, in schools, if test scores aren't where they need to be, then principals are required to work with teachers, as they are in every state. But I also know that over a period of time, teachers are dismissed when they're not productive in the classroom, and the productivity is based on the test score. And when a school gets a lower rating, teachers are dismissed, principals are dismissed, we bring new people in. This goes back to the previous question. This inconsistency in the culture over time of personnel rotating in and out because of standards and accountability tensions. It's not healthy for the student. It's not healthy for the community. And I think that we're faced with this kind of dilemma as to what to do with this ethical drift that's perpetrated on an educational system by employees, by teachers, by principals, even by central office personnel in large urban population centers who want their school and district to look good, so they violate basic ethical tenets and they cheat. But at the same time, they recognize if they allow their test scores to go down and they're not in compliance, if they don't meet the standards and they're put under review, then there's a different kind of tension that they have to deal with. So they're in an ethical dilemma, and they have a wrong decision path that oftentimes they choose the lesser of the two wrongs.
Okay, I have a question. I've been working with teachers in my building, and we, in Pennsylvania, they released the preliminary items for the PSSA. So I met with teachers, and the way questions are designed, the way Common Core is designed is very multi-layered. And they were actually struggling with how to teach this way. So coming from the university, do you think that universities are adequately preparing teachers to go into classrooms? Like, what is your position on how teachers are not being prepared, which brings about programs like Teach for America, Teaching Fellows? Do you think that they're congruent, the preparation versus what teachers actually have to deal with in classrooms now?
Well, there's no straight answer to that, but I want to say no, I do not. But I don't want at the same time to say no, I do not believe that they are adequately preparing disparage universities. Here's the thing. University preparation programs are distanced from the reality of the public school or the private school or whatever educational system that they put their practitioners in once they graduate and they get their certification or licensure. When I say they're distanced from, we have to recognize that teacher preparation programs are not surrogate for the reality of what goes on in a classroom in a school when a teacher takes a position. They are not even close approximations. Even those that have well-grounded, well-structured clinical practicums or experiences for their teachers, the problem here is that we have teacher educators, we have principal educators, superintendent educators who are distanced from both in terms of time and in terms of just access to public schools. They're distanced from the reality of what's going on in schools. In many instances, in teacher preparation programs across the country, and I know this is true in Texas, and I know it's true in probably Philadelphia, and I'm sure it's true in most states. We have individuals who have been in teacher education for decades, preparing teachers to go into schools, who aren't cognizant that when they begin as teacher educators, they didn't have the standards and accountability system pressing on them in public schools. So when they were preparing teachers to go into schools, they were preparing teachers for a very different culture and a very different time. So today, I see a need to have a different kind of conversation, a critical conversation, where, again, these need to be nested conversations between higher ed faculty and public ed personnel, teachers, principals, and so on. We need to go out into the schools and we need to recognize what the critical issues are that teachers are confronting every day. We need to recognize that when 45% of your time as a teacher is dedicated to test preparation for a standardized test, that preparing a teacher in a teacher preparation program without any idea that 45% of your time is going to be dedicated to that is not preparing them well. And the same is true for principal preparation programs. When we do not prepare principals to go out into schools where a large part of their responsibility, of their day-to-day task, is monitoring test preparation and or success or not, or lack of success on standardized tests and what the repercussion is for that, then we're not preparing them well either. And this is part of the problem that we have, is the disconnect between higher ed and public ed. and the realization that the conversations we have are more on paper and rhetorical. They're not face-to-face. We're not out in the school. We don't recognize that, and we need to.
Okay, thank you. Pat, I'm going to begin asking some questions from the higher education perspective because there are participants who are interested in that track and they would like to know more. So, for instance, Luis Constantino, who is a third-year doctoral student, asked, given recent move by many higher education institutions toward increased use of adjunct faculty to deliver programs, what is the impact of this on scholar-practitioner approach to higher education practices?
Okay. It's interesting. I've just had this conversation on this topic in the last 2 weeks with a number of folks. And first is, let me say, and this is going to be an old pattern that's going to replay constantly, but universities across the country are characteristically now beginning to devolve from tenure-track faculty to increasing adjunct faculty. Simultaneously, they're also beginning to evolve more online program and so on and so forth. All part of a neoliberal agenda. But it's a cost-saving measure. Universities moving to adjunct do not have the cost on personnel for benefits and so on that they have with full-time tenure-track personnel. Set that aside. The real heart of this question, I think, is that as long as you use adjuncts and you bring them in, but you don't develop a culture that enculturates them into the culture of the scholar-practitioner, so that we have adjuncts that recognize and value the need for inquiry, for research, that understand the work of the scholar-practitioner is not just come in, teach a class, go home. The problem we have right now with adjuncts is that for the most part they're not required to attend faculty meetings. They are not held to the same standards that full-time faculty are. For the most part, they rotate in and out of adjunct positions. They may be adjuncting for more than one institution. There's really probably not any consistency in the pattern of how the curriculum and the instruction system is designed for adjuncts, or it's left to the adjunct to design it. When I say all of this, is to go to the point that if we want our adjuncts in higher ed to continue to be a part of a scholar-practitioner culture, we have to bring them into that culture in ways that are part of how do we develop them as scholar-practitioner. Yes, they're adjunct, but they're working in our institution, they're teaching in our programs, they're teaching courses that are related to the preparation of scholar-practitioners. And if they don't have commitment and investment in that, then they will not teach with the same heart that a scholar-practitioner professor will teach with. That in and of itself is the problematic we're confronted with. And it's bound in a larger problematique of economics and of viability of online programs and a dozen other points that all go back to that neoliberal agenda. But if we really want to foster scholar-practitioner leadership, scholar-practitioner teacher-educator, scholar-practitioner culture, then what we have to do is bring them into that culture and make them a part of it. We need to engage them in and have some priorities on what do they have to have commitment to, and what do we expect of them, and how do we monitor our expectations. And I don't mean applying standards and accountability. I mean, what are the points of scholar-practitioner culture that we can't measure with a standardized test, but we have to be able to understand how that's evolving. Those are things that we have to grapple with.
Yeah, thank you. Certainly, IDEPEL is a doctoral program right now that we wish we have more full-time staff, but we don't. And so a number of our courses are taught by adjuncts. And it is actually a question that I've been grappling with personally, to think about how can I bring them into the culture of the program. And I think by beginning by involving them into the doctoral meetings probably would be one chance of doing it, although typically these meetings actually might happen at a time that's not convenient for some of these individuals. But I suppose we can certainly be creative about that, including live or online portions of that.
I would also encourage you to, the IDEPEL conference, have a strand in the conference in the future that focuses on, invites your adjunct faculty to come in and be a part of the conference with the idea that you're trying to cultivate their participation in this scholar-practitioner culture. And I think your idea about having conversations is important. I think that they not just drawing them into the faculty meeting, but having faculty draw them into small study groups and work with them in ways that help to cultivate the scholar-practitioner ideals.
Yeah, quite a few of them actually are involved through the tables that were released yesterday. So they are involved certainly in the online conference. Thank goodness. Something I did do right. But yeah, we could definitely do more to do that. And I think also your earlier discussion about how people make up the culture of institution. It's true at the lower ed setting, but it's definitely true also in the higher education setting. And St. Joe's, along with others, I think right now are experiencing just a constant influx of leadership. And that really has been, we have been losing a lot of institutional memory and culture. But this is where we are. So I wonder with institutions like this, I think, yeah, I don't know how would you go about, kind of almost like you need to heal first as a community, then you need to move forward. I don't know if you can speak to that.
I agree that we need to heal first before we move forward, but I think we have to first understand the wound. And I think that too often in institutions, higher ed, as an example, they don't understand the wounds that have been inflicted. They don't understand the visible and the invisible wounds that are inflicted every day by changes in something like online programs or going to more adjuncts without recognizing how it wounds the organization, the infrastructure of the organization. And there are no strategies in play to enable the institution, its members, its people, to begin to recognize and deal with that wound, both the visible and the invisible. We think about a wound in the physical sense of what we can see on the surface of a person, but we have to also think about the wound in terms of what we can't see on the surface of a person, which is on the inside. This goes back to the question earlier about consciousness. I think that in this process we have to evolve a critical consciousness in the university and recognize that every time that we attempt to change something in here, that it has a consequence for others. And the consequence for others has to be our responsibility, not just theirs, not just the other. And I think that in the institution, I go back to conversation, I go back to having these hard conversations, but I also think if we want wellness in the university as we make changes over time, and we want to heal, we have to become first self-aware of where the wounds came from and why, and then recognize their existence. We have to embrace that, and then we can begin to heal. Warren Bennis, early in his career as the university president, I believe was the University of Cincinnati, went in and he was going to change it overnight. He writes about this in one of his books. And he talks about the lesson he learned there, the fact that the culture pushed back on him. And I think oftentimes the culture does push back on people that want to change it. But I think also what happens is that individuals in universities in the upper administrative positions hire external marketing firms to come in and give them guidance on how to remarket, reprofile, rebrand is the term that we use here, the university, without taking into consideration that you have to vet that with the people that are the university. So 3 years ago, the university employed a marketing firm from the East Coast. They came in and they were going to change the whole image of the university right down to the mascot. And in that process, they didn't vet it with anybody. They didn't vet it with the alumni. They didn't vet it with the people internal to the organization. They didn't vet it with the students. Somebody leaked the message just before it was going to come out and be released that this is what was going to happen. It went viral overnight on Facebook and every other social media. And within a week, the whole upper administration, the Board of Regents, everybody was caught in a maelstrom of pushback from the culture, from the alumni, from the students, from the public, from every aspect. And that whole reprofiling, that rebranding was set aside. And the president came out in a number of messages to say, we're not going to do this. We've heard what you've had to say. I use that as an example of sometimes the wounds are deep, sometimes they're visible, and sometimes they're invisible. But we have to create a self-awareness within the people that populate the institution of where the wounds are, how they were wounded, before we can move forward. And that requires a lot of work beforehand.
Yeah, just as a commentary, yes, it does, because I think these wounds accumulate, and after a while, they become a maelstrom of negativity, I think, that comes out from the community members, and sometimes those negativity, I think, can overshadow or mask some of the deeper level concerns, and sorting through all that is kind of difficult, I would say. Okay, here's a question from Kevin. Oh, Gifty, go ahead.
Yeah, I actually had a question to piggyback off of that, Patrick. So considering that K through 12 and universities each have their own problems that come along with it. So you can say K through 12 have the standards, and higher ed, of course, with the influx of adjuncts. In your opinion, which side is easier to cultivate the scholar-practitioner?
Which side being K-12?
Which side, in terms of K through 12 and higher ed? Of course, both areas, I guess, could use the scholar-practitioner, of course, for the benefit of the students. But in your opinion, which atmosphere of the two is easier to cultivate, actually cultivate the scholar-practitioner, considering the limitations that either side has?
My first response is neither one, and the reason for that is, and then I'm going to recant that and give you a different answer. But my reason for that is if we're looking at the institution at large, the university or the K-12 school district, the school, we look at that at large, changing that culture is phenomenally difficult. It goes back to my analogy to at least one generation of students going through a school, or in the university, it will take multiple generations of students beginning as freshmen, graduating as seniors over time, because the culture in either institution didn't get where it is in the short term. If we're talking about, however, in the university, the preparation program for educators, I think it's more realistic to begin to inculcate a scholar-practitioner culture vis-a-vis the preparation program. If we're looking at the K-12 school, I think it's more problematic because we have to sell, to use a term, we have to get people vested in the scholar-practitioner idea, the ideals, on not just the faculty level, but also on the parent level and on the community level, because they own the school. That what we have to recognize is that when in the early days of this country, when it was written, "We the people," it didn't mean just the people we want. It means everybody is the public. And so getting the public vested in a scholar-practitioner ideal requires an enormous amount of work. But it should be work that can be done. And it should be work that can be done at the K-12 level, and it should be work that can be done at the university level. What it requires, however, is a commitment from everybody from the top level down to the bottom level to invest the time in this and to give voice to it and to recognize that it will require change on the part of everybody, whether it's the superintendent, the school board, and right down through to the teacher in the classroom and the parents at home, or if it's the president and the board of regents in a university, right down through the deans, from the provost down to the department chair and the faculty and departments. Getting that kind of investment is a lifetime of work. No one should engage in this believing that they're going to do it on their watch. They should recognize that the work they begin will be work that has to be continued by others over time, and it will take many lifetimes to transform a culture in a university or in a K-12 educational system, because it's not just a few individuals that you're working with. It's multiple individuals across generations and across different demographics and across different roles and responsibilities within a community or a city.
Okay, thank you. Steve, would you like to ask your question?
Patrick, one of the things that I find at Villanova is that a lot of our students are materially comfortable. They have a lot of financial advantages. And one of the challenges I find as an Augustinian, religious, and also as someone who really tries to embrace scholar-practitioner philosophy, is how do I speak this philosophy or try to inculcate this philosophy for students who are really materially comfortable. And that's one of the challenges I face, I think, here at Villanova. We have a slogan here that we talk about igniting change. And so that's something that we try to do here. But I like this scholar-practitioner context because it speaks to me personally. And how can I, and do you have any suggestions how I can make that more real and challenge my students to look in that direction?
I wish I had a clear-cut answer to that. The thing I think that we grapple with, I think your question for me, and what we grapple with in many educational settings is we do have those individuals that are perhaps altogether too comfortable in their well-being financially and not recognizing that this is a social justice issue, that they have, by the very nature of being a part of a democratic society, I believe, by the very nature of being an ethical being, they have a moral responsibility to the society at large. They don't have the option, I don't believe, nor should they assume that they do have, to disenfranchise everybody else that isn't on the same level that they are without any concern for what that disenfranchisement means for we the people, the public, for those individuals who are not as fortunate, and how that impacts them throughout their life. I think that we have to work with our students who are too comfortable to recognize that they need to be less comfortable. We need to help them understand the social justice agenda. That's everyone's responsibility. I think that in this case, using some strategies, for instance, I use ethical case dilemmas that I help the students write based on an experience that they've had. I use a social injustice case process where I ask them to write about a social injustice they've experienced. But I also bring some of the cases forward that I have developed that are designed to make them uncomfortable rather, in their own heart and in their own mind. And they're intentional. They're based on true stories. They're intentional in that I want to situate the student who may be altogether too comfortable because they're well off financially. They come from an upper socioeconomic class family. their parents and family own a large part of a community. I want them to recognize what that means. That responsibility is even greater when they have those kinds of means as to how they help society. And I think that we have to make them uncomfortable in their own skin. We have to do it in a way that's kind of hard, but it also recognizes the reality of the world that can't be sheltered away, that they can't be sheltered away from that reality. They will eventually have to enter it, and if they enter it with a cold heart, they will not be able to recognize their role and responsibility as a moral being. And I think that's our job in the preparation program, is to help break down.
I try to encourage them that they have a tremendous opportunity because of their comfort to make change.
Mm-hmm.
That they have opportunities that maybe some other people don't have to make change in society, and they're really well positioned to do that. And I talk about the change of heart that is needed in our society and our culture.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to say this ties in very nicely with Kevin Capano's question of how can one consciously make the ethical self as an instrument for social justice. If we as faculty can understand how to communicate this and maybe actualize it for our students, it might be easier than to bring the students along with this journey.
Yeah, I think that understanding and cultivating the excuse me, the ethical self is work that's needed by everyone. Recognizing what that means in context is very difficult sometimes for individuals. There's this kind of personal fear of knowing who I am as an ethical being, knowing who I really am when I crawl inside of that and recognize that who I want people to believe I am and who I am are oftentimes not the same. I do a little process with my doc students, and I ask them to write 3 narratives. I start out with who am I, and I frame it as an ethical being, and then I ask, what am I as an ethical being? And then I ask, why am I as an ethical being? Those are the 3 questions. We do that over the course of the semester in the Ethics and Philosophy course. They have to crawl inside and deconstruct themselves, because it's easy to say, I'm Aubrey Wang. I'm a professor at St. Joseph's University in Philadelphia. But to go deeper than that, as to what I am and why I am, is more about the search, the internal search of the ethical being, the ethical self. And I think recognizing that sometimes what we find out about ourselves doesn't make us altogether comfortable, as is often the case in my doctoral classes. It's a very emotive experience sometimes for them to realize that who they want people to believe they are and who they really are is a great divide between. And they have to heal that divide. They have to who they are in reality and then begin to recreate themselves as the ethical person that they want to be and need to be as a scholar practitioner. I go back to a constant argument. And I said this in the keynote. We live with our foot, figuratively speaking, in 2 worlds: the world of the scholar and the world of the practitioner. I think that the thing that the very heart of this, that what binds us together as scholar and practitioner, is the ethical self. It is the realization that the ethical self in who we are as scholar and the ethical self of who we are in practitioner need not be what Dewey saw as a dualism. That we can heal that divide by cultivating the ethical self and understanding that that's the bridge between. And that's the work out in front of us every day, 7 days a week, 52 weeks out of the year. We have to do that, and we don't get to step aside from it.
Thank you. You've been talking for about an hour, Pat. Would you like to rest a little bit before we maybe start focusing the conversation about the scholarship aspect of this dialogue?
I have a drink of water first.
Yeah, please, please. Yeah. Yeah, so the panelists are here. If you could just, you also rest a bit and then think about what would you like to engage a conversation about relating to scholarship and the scholar side of being a scholar practitioner. Any of you want to start first?
Yeah, can I start?
Out. Oh, okay.
Oh, go ahead,
Okay. So, Patrick, of course, for those of us, myself, Khadijah, and Jill, who are about to graduate and have concluded our dissertations, I know I speak for myself and Jill when I say we're interested in publishing, definitely. A very important piece to, I guess, writing a dissertation is the uniqueness of our study. And so we have, I guess, developed a passion for our topics and the uniqueness. So we are interested in publishing. So that brings me to my question that, I guess, what would be the first steps after having completed our studies and submitted our dissertations? What would you suggest as our first steps in getting our dissertations published, especially those that can actually go into different articles and different journals, because we actually cover 2 or 3 different, I guess, fields of our study?
Okay. Well, the first thing once you've defended your dissertation is to take a big rest and a long vacation.
Yes.
Probably not going to happen, but it's a good idea. I would sit down. What I encourage my doctoral students, and I have 9 that have defended this semester that will be graduating in May.
Wow.
It's the biggest load I've had for a while. But what I do at the end of every dissertation defense, and then I follow up with them over the weeks as we finalize the dissertation, and then I schedule a meeting after they've graduated and had some timeout time to come back in the summer. And we sat down, and then I talk with them about, okay, let's look at the dissertation and let's look at the options. One of my doctoral students who graduated 3 years ago just emailed me and said his dissertation has been published as a book. Wow. He had to do a little work on it, obviously. I have several of my students have had their dissertations transformed into a book. I've got one that's currently working with Teacher College Press to transform her dissertation into a book, and she's having to do some work on that, but that's fine. But I sit down with them and I say, let's talk about what your original career goals were when you came into the program. What do you see your career goals now? And at some point, where do you see yourself maybe going into higher ed or teaching as an adjunct or doing some work within the university? What I want to do is situate them in a future path, a future career path, and then I want to talk about how can we use the dissertation as a form of currency, as a way of preparing them for that future career path. And we talk about what are the options here. One of the students that defended his dissertation is 346 pages long, and it's a wonderful study. He's from Nepal, so he brings a really rich background of being an administrator in Nepal. Came to this country to study in our program, and I have another student's dissertation is over 200 pages long, and it's a phenomenological study. I sit down with each of them and I say those things that I just iterated, and then I say, let's talk about how many articles do you think you want to do a book from your study? If so, we have to think about how we want to carve a book project out, and as opposed to maybe 3 or 4 different articles. I also encourage them to do, in the first year after they graduate, I encourage them to look at peer review conferences. So I have 2 of my alumni that were with me at a conference in Canada in the fall, UCEA Values and Ethics and Leadership Conference. And then they were with me at UCEA as well, and then they were with me at AERA in April. So what I'm interested in here is how I can keep them involved in professional conferences, peer review conferences, and further develop threads of their dissertation as conference papers that can also become publications. So I'm multitasking them to look at publications from the dissertation, journal articles, possible book chapters or books, but I'm also asking them to continue to put that dissertation out there to the professional community at peer review conferences. I want them to develop that profile. I've had a couple of them that have been invited speakers in symposia, so I think that's also an important consideration. But I think that the dissertation is how you can mine that for multiple opportunities to publish and to present and to move your own research agenda to the next level, not get bogged down in just repeating time and time again. I've worked with a faculty person who came into the department here in secondary ed 6 years ago. She's now tenured, but she published only from her dissertation. She didn't do other original work, and except for a few pieces here and there and some conference stuff, most of it evolved from the dissertation. And I said, now it's time to set that aside. You've really mined that about as far as you can, and we need to look at new research projects. And so at the same time, I put a cautionary note in there with that story, and that you don't want to get bound up in the dissertation and stay with it for 5 years trying to publish from it and not do anything new. You need to do new work as well as use the dissertation as a form of currency to get published. I typically ask my doc students when we sit down, and this is after the defense and so on, I want you to think about what journals you might want to publish in and what profile that journal would bring to your work. So I asked them, do you want a top tier, second tier, third tier journal? So if they go for third tier, I say why. I typically want them to shoot for the top tier, top 1 or 2 tiers. But we look at, and I say, well, let's identify 2 or 3 journals. I want you to go out and I want you to look at what they've published in the last 2 years. I want you to get 2 or 3 examples. I want you to study that, because that's the writing style that they're publishing right now under the current editorial staff. And so I work through this over a year. I work through it with them, and we carve out 2 or 3 different projects from their dissertation, target 2 or 3 different journals, and then we narrow it down to 1 journal for each of the projects, and systematically work through, get the first one pretty much finished and off to the journal for review. And they've got the second one about midstream. They focus on it then, and then when that one goes off to review, they finish the third one. So I do it in sequence like that so that they've got things coming out and periodically, and structure it that way as a process. Because I want to also inculcate that into the way that they look at their scholarship as an ongoing process. It's not a beginning and an end.
And just to piggyback off of that, how do you determine the tiers of the journals?
Well, an example would be Educational Administration Quarterly, which is published by UCEA, is a top-tier ed-admin journal. Journal of Educational Administration, which is an international journal, is a top-tier journal. So you have those journals that are recognized in the professional community as top-tier journals, and they're rated or ranked accordingly. Many institutions actually have a protocol set up that say these are the top-tier journals we want you to focus on. These are the second-tier journals that you can consider. We want you to stay away from these journals because they're third or fourth-tier journals. I don't do that with my students initially because I like for them to get a piece published and get the energy from that, and then we begin to focus forward. But like I said, I ask them to bring me some examples of journals they want to consider. Sometimes I give them examples. and then I ask them to bring some current pieces that have been published, so that we can look at the writing style that they're accepting, the ideas that they're working with. I ask them what are the themed issues they're coming up with, if any, in these journals. Where do they see their work as an open themed issue, or do they see it in a thematic structure?
Yeah. And so for those of you, you've been working with the dissertation committee. So I would say that definitely engage in this level of conversation with the chair, with your committee members, and just say that you're interested in publishing your work, and they're very familiar with your work, and what journals would they recommend, and also kind of identify if there's someone possibly that you might want to maybe collaborate on through this process, because having someone who's actually experienced experienced writer and researcher would actually help pave the rest of the path for you, be a lot easier, because the person can help you to determine, for instance, which journals would be top tier, second tier, third tier, and then all the rest of the process that would go through. Because Gifty, I know your study is very different, for instance, from Jill's, and definitely very different from Khadijah's, etc. So the type of journals that you will consider will be different from one another, and your committee members will know deeply what your study was about and which would be appropriate.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I've found the last 5 years, we've actually cultivated cross-cohort collaboration for scholarship. And so in the 2012, I'll give you an example, 2012 cohort, I have, which the 2011, 2012 are those 9 students that are graduating in May that have defended their dissertation. I have 3 students in the 2012 who are collaborating with students from 2010 and 11 on many scholarship projects, and I've invited one of them as an alumni, is now at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, as an assistant professor, and just went there last year. I invited both he and another doc student who just defended his dissertation to be co-authors on a chapter with me for an international handbook on leadership. And the same students have partnered with the student from Nepal, and they presented 3 different papers at AERA. They presented at UCEA last fall. 2 of them presented together at the conference where I was in Canada last fall. They have a number of writing projects. They've published several articles, 3 of them co-authoring 2 of them. And all of these are kind of cross-cohort collaborations. And those are rich conversations that perpetuate the scholar-practitioner ideals and build that kind of culture across the cohorts. And I think that's another powerful example of what we might do in our doctoral programs to build the kind of conversations that take scholarship to another level.
That's wonderful. I think with this online conference, and we have an annual conference right now, I think this is actually a place where, for instance, some of those work in progress could be showcased, the intra-cohort collaboration or even within cohort collaboration. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is definitely a place where we can showcase that. And yeah.
I have a question. Mm-hmm. I'm very interested in publishing in journals, but I'm also very interested in having my writing be available to the average person, not meaning average, but I still want to remain credible. So what other pathways could I go outside of the journals? Because the average administrator is not going to say, oh, I'm going to go to the Journal of Ed. Where mm-hmm. else could I write so that they can access my publications?
Well, AASA, which is the American Association of School Administrators, has 3 journals, I believe. NASSP, the National Association of Secondary School Principals, and their corollary professional group, the elementary principals, all have journals. Phi Delta Kappan, I just had a student, now alumni, 2 years ago, publish a piece in Phi Delta Kappan based on his dissertation. I think that it's important that we look at what I call trade journals that are not peer-reviewed, but they are journals that reach tens of thousands of people every time an issue comes out, to get your voice out there among the profession, the practitioners in that profession, the principals, the superintendents, the teachers, and put it out there into the professional community in a very accessible way. So you can take elements of a dissertation and recast that in a writing style that's appropriate for one of those journals. And that opens you up to a whole different venue of audience, and a very large audience, whereas a top-tier journal may be read within the professional organization that sponsors the journal. A journal like Phi Delta Kappa will be read by tens of thousands of people across, not just in the U.S. either. Sometimes we're looking at an international audience. So these are things that I also focus on with my students. Don't just limit yourself. Open yourself up. Early in my career, I wrote pieces for Tech Trends and a number of other journals that are more for a particular audience, but it was on systemic change and systems thinking in education. And I just had an invitation about a month ago from the same editor wanting me to do a piece on ethical systems. And so the thing is, don't keep your voice locked away into specific professional journals. Open it up to a broader audience every once in a while. It helps. It also advances your credibility.
Thank you.
Steve, do you have any questions or others?
Yeah, I think Patrick, you're editor, co-editor of the Scholar-Practitioner Quarterly. What would you recommend for us? Any advice you could give us as far as possibilities for the journal that you co-edited with Ray Horn?
I'm always open to receiving manuscripts from doc students around the country, and so I would encourage you to consider submission of a manuscript, either based on your dissertation or current work that you're doing. I welcome that opportunity, and I think that in terms of the journal, it's a peer-reviewed journal. We have an international readership, so I think you get your work out there into the professional community, both domestic and internationally. I think that's very good. I think that it's important that we have individuals from higher ed institutions where the scholar-practitioner ideals are a part of the preparation, publish in the journal to give that voice an active place to be a part of the larger conversation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Patrick, I actually did my dissertation on effective pedagogy in public health, government agencies.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder, do you find it easier to get published in, I guess, scholarly journals or the trade journals? What would you suggest to be a first step or first target in getting published?
Probably in peer-reviewed journals.
Okay.
Trade journals the decisions are made by the editorial staff as to what's published, and for peer-reviewed journals, it's largely based on the peer review process. That doesn't mean that the editorial staff doesn't make the final decision, but what it does mean is for a trade journal, they don't go out for peer review. They typically cultivate what they want in an issue, which is a very different protocol.
Sorry, I think I'm doing a little too much. There's a question that just arrived from Tony Buckley, who's a first-year doctoral student. Okay, it's a little long. Among the many resources you provided on getting published, one article emphasized the importance of understanding the philosophy that guides review and acceptance process. As such, I'm particularly interested in the Scholar-Practitioner Quarterly. In particular, the concept of democratic professionalism is addressed often. I'm wondering whether SPQ publishes or would consider publishing an article undertaking an analysis of one or more case histories of democratic professionalism in practice that might advance certain principles or philosophies held or advanced by the publication.
The straightforward answer is yes, that we would be most interested in that. And in the past, we've clearly focused on democracy and democratic leadership and democratic ideals, democratic culture. And so I think that looking at an analysis of case histories of democratic professionalism in practice would certainly be something of interest.
Our students are, I think based on what you have shared so far, if I may just try to summarize, and please add into what I'm saying. I think for the new doctoral graduates, the new doctorates, I think what Pat has shared is that you definitely should consider the next step. But the next step should be something that you don't necessarily have to go alone. You can involve, for instance, your dissertation committee and chair to go along with you in this process. But the first thing that you probably want to aim for is to understand and try to become a member, say, of a professional community or organization that would be interested in your type of work. Then understand when the conference, the peer review conference for those organizations would be, and then try to submit at least one proposal out of your dissertation. And as you go through this process, you will also be then engaged in conversations that will allow you to think about, okay, besides from this one proposal that could possibly later on turn into an article, what other projects can I break out from the dissertation itself, or maybe consider maybe additional new research lines that I can be pursuing. This process is going to be an ongoing journey. It is not going to be, it's not going to be one stop. It's going to be ongoing, and thinking about, in some ways, all the effort that you have put into conducting your research and really putting together a high-quality dissertation. It would just be a continuing of that culture that you're beginning to understand.
Yeah, I might just add, if I could.
Please.
There are some considerations during the dissertation process that merge well into the publication process, and one of those is be patient with yourself and with others. Doing dissertation research, writing the dissertation does not come easily, nor should it. So be patient. Writing an article for publication does not come easily. Even though you're taking it out of your dissertation, you have to resituate it as a piece standalone from the dissertation. Be patient. Recognize that the dissertation process is a year plus. Also recognize that publishing a piece in a peer-reviewed journal is oftentimes a year plus. It could be 18 months. So be patient with yourself in the dissertation. Be patient with everybody in the journal writing, and recognize that you may have the best article in the world that you submit as a manuscript. It's still going through the peer review process, and it may still take over a year before you get any indication that it's going to be published. You may have to revise it once or twice. I would tell you this, and emphatically encourage you to do this. Joining the professional organizations is important. I would also encourage you to look at journals and sign up to be a reviewer for those journals that you would like to consider for publication in at some time. But also, I believe, and my doctoral students in their second year, all of them review for at least 3 journals. And I do that because I want them to understand the review process. And what that means is that they get a different kind of insight in terms of writing by reviewing other people's work. And they play that against multiple experiences of being a reviewer across multiple journals. They recognize the benefit of that in the long run is to situate them in writing an article that addresses some of the weaknesses that they found in the articles they reviewed. And typically, this is a benefit that is lost on a lot of folks. I do the same thing with my new assistant professors that come into the department. I recommend that they become reviewers for journals. I do this with the doctoral students. I think it's an imperative.
Yeah, that's right. So thank you so much, everybody. We are coming to the end of the live fireside chat. And I would imagine, Patrick, we're going to keep the online conference on for a little while. So if there are additional comments and questions that are posted on the in the online conference, I hope you wouldn't mind addressing those additional questions.
I'll have a little bit of time, but I have to get back to my class.
Thank you. So thank you, everybody. This has been a wonderful experience. Talk to you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.